My name is Jenna Calloway. I'm 22 years old. And when I was 17, my stepsister stood in the middle of our living room, held up a necklace that had belonged to my mother, and told my father, her mother, and 4 other people that I had stolen it from her. She was crying, real tears, the kind that come fast and convincingly and make everyone in the room turn and look at you like you're the problem. My father looked at me, not with doubt, with certainty, the kind that had already decided before I opened my mouth. I told the truth. I said exactly what had happened, clearly and completely. Nobody believed me. They made me apologize. I stood in that living room and said words I did not mean to a girl who had been dismantling my life one small, calculated move at a time for 8 months. And I said them because I had no proof and she had tears, and that was the entire difference. But here's the thing about proof. Sometimes you don't have it yet. Sometimes you have to wait and watch. And be patient in the particular way of someone who knows the truth and knows that the truth, eventually, has a way of surfacing. You just have to make sure you're ready when it does. I was ready. And when the truth came out, I made sure every single person who had stood in that living room and chosen her over me was in the room to see it. Before I tell you what I did, take a moment to like this video. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do by someone you had to live with, subscribe if you want to hear more. Drop a comment with your city and the time where you are. I read every one. Now let me take you back to where this started, because the necklace was not the beginning. It was just the moment everything that had been building finally had a name. My parents divorced when I was 16. I am not going to tell you it was a surprise. It wasn't. Some marriages end loudly, in arguments and slammed doors, and nights where everyone knows something is wrong. Mine ended quietly. The kind of quiet that's actually louder than noise once you understand what it means. Dinners where no one spoke. A house where my parents moved around each other like furniture. A stillness that had a weight to it. The divorce itself was civil. No courtroom, no lawyers screaming at each other. Just 2 people who had decided they were finished and were going to be organized about it. My mother moved to an apartment 20 minutes away. My father kept the house. I stayed with my father. Not because I chose him over her. Because my mother's apartment was a 1-bedroom and she was working 2 jobs while she found her footing, and she looked at me one evening with the honesty that she always had and said, "Jen, I need 6 months. I need to get stable and then we figure it out. Can you give me 6 months?" I said yes. Because she asked, and because she was honest, and because I loved her enough to understand that needing time was not the same as not wanting me. 6 months. That was the plan. My father met Renee 3 months before the divorce was final. I found out because he told me, over dinner one night in December, that he had been seeing someone and that she was wonderful and that he hoped I would give her a chance. I said I would try. I meant it. I genuinely meant it at the time. Renee moved in 4 months later. She was 43, my father's age, with a job in real estate and a daughter named Brianna, who was 17, 1 year older than me. They brought boxes on a Saturday morning. My father carried them in from a rented van with the energy of someone who had decided this was a fresh start and was committing to it fully. Renee was fine, pleasant. She tried in the way people try when they know the situation is complicated and they want to smooth the edges. She brought food. She asked about my school. She left space for me in a way that Brianna did not. Brianna. I want to be precise about Brianna, because it would be easy to describe her as simply a mean girl and leave it at that. She was not simply anything. She was strategic. That's the word I would use now, at 22. Looking back with more understanding than I had at 16. Strategic in the way that certain people are strategic from a very young age, which is to say she understood exactly which levers to pull and when and how hard, and she almost never pulled them where adults could see. Almost. The first week, she was neutral, polite enough. She took the larger bedroom, which I had been using as a study space, because it was empty, and her mother had asked my father, and my father had said of course, not mentioning it to me until the boxes were already in there. I came home from school to find my things in a pile in the hallway outside the door. I found my father in the kitchen. I said, My things are in the hallway. He said, Brianna needs a room, Jen. She can't share. I said, that was my study. He said, you have your own room. Use your desk. I had a small desk in my room. I had been using the larger room because it had a table big enough to spread out project materials. I was taking 3 AP classes that year. I said, okay, I understand. Because I did understand. I understood that my father had made a decision and that arguing about it would accomplish nothing, and that the pile of my things in the hallway was the first in what I suspected would be a longer series of adjustments. I was right. The second week, Brianna found her range. It started small. Comments that could be read either way. She would look at something I was wearing and say, oh, is that your style? With the particular inflection that put the word style in quiet quotes. She would walk into a room I was in, look around, and say, this is such a cozy little space, almost like she was a guest complimenting something quaint. One evening I was making dinner, something I had been doing a few nights a week since the divorce because my father worked late, and someone had to. Brianna came into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, looked at what I was cooking, and said, you know Renee has a whole system for the kitchen, right? She doesn't really like other people rearranging things. I said, I'm making pasta. I haven't rearranged anything. She shrugged. Just letting you know. She walked out. I stood at the stove and thought about whether to say something to my father. I decided not to. It was small. It was ambiguous. It was exactly the kind of thing that, reported to an adult, would make me sound oversensitive. That was the design of it. The comments continued. A steady, low-level current of small things that each individually meant nothing and collectively meant everything. When I spoke at dinner, she would look at her phone. When I got a good grade on something and mentioned it, she would say, that's cute, like praising a child who had drawn a picture. When I had friends over, she would appear in the living room and insert herself into the conversation with the ease of someone who knew she was more charming than me and was not shy about using it. My friends liked her. That was the worst part. She was good with people. She knew how to be funny and warm and interesting in group settings. She knew how to make people feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. My friend Kayla said once, Brianna is actually really cool. Have you two bonded yet? I smiled and said, we're getting there. What I thought was, you don't live with her. The school situation started in September. I had been at Fairview High for 2 years. I knew my place there, which is to say I had built a small but solid thing, good grades, a spot on the yearbook committee, a teacher, Mr. Aldridge, who ran the creative writing program and who had told me the previous spring that I had a real voice and should consider applying to the school literary magazine as an editor the following year. I had been looking forward to that all summer. Brianna enrolled at Fairview in September. She had been at a private school previously, but Renee said the commute was too much now that they'd moved. I found out she was enrolling 3 days before school started. My father mentioned it at breakfast. Brianna was in the room. She was looking at her phone. She looked up when he said it, and looked at me with an expression I was beginning to recognize. Neutral on the surface, something underneath that only I could see. She said, it'll be fun. We can carpool. I said, sure. What I thought was, nothing good is going to come of this. I was correct. The first month she mapped the school. That's the only way I can describe it. She was methodical about it. She identified the social architecture, who mattered and why. Which teachers had influence beyond their classrooms? Which activities carried the most visibility? She was new and she was charming, and within 4 weeks, she had embedded herself in a way that would have taken most people a full semester. She joined the literary magazine, not as a writer, as a layout designer, which was a role that had opened up when a senior graduated. She had no particular background in design. She asked Mr. Aldridge directly if she could try. He said yes. I was in the room when she asked. I watched it happen. I watched Mr. Aldridge respond to her warmth and her directness and her confidence, and I thought, she is going to take this space too. The way she took the study room, the way she took the dinner table conversation, systematically and with perfect plausible deniability. I said nothing. I became a junior editor on the magazine in October, which was what I'd been working toward. It was a good thing. My own thing. I told myself it didn't matter that she was on the same team. It mattered. She would arrive at meetings with ideas that were adjacent to things I had mentioned at home. Not identical. Close enough to notice if you were me. Far enough that no one else would see it. She would present them with confidence, and they would land well, and I would sit across the table and recognize the shape of something that had started in my mouth and arrived at the table through hers. Once I said something about it. Lightly. In the car on the way home. I said, "The mood board idea. I mentioned something like that at dinner last week." She looked out the window. "Did you?" I don't remember that. She said it with complete ease. The ease of someone who either genuinely didn't remember or had become so comfortable with this particular move that it no longer required effort. I didn't bring it up again. I want to stop here for a second, because I know some of you are doing the math right now. You're thinking, why didn't she tell someone? Why didn't she go to her dad, her mom, a teacher? I want to answer that directly. I did tell my father. Twice in the first 3 months. I was specific. I described specific incidents, specific words, specific patterns. The first time he said, "Jen, she's new here. She's adjusting. Give her some grace." The second time he said, "You know, Renee says Brianna finds you cold, that you don't really make her feel welcome. Maybe that's worth thinking about." That was the moment I understood that my father had already decided something. Not because he didn't love me, but because Renee loved Brianna the way my father wanted to see love look warm and visible and demonstrative. And Brianna performed distress convincingly when it served her, and performed warmth convincingly the rest of the time. And my father, who had spent years in a quiet marriage, had found something loud and warm, and he did not want to look at it too carefully. I told my mother on one of our weekends. She listened carefully and asked good questions, and then she said, "Document everything, Jen. Write it down. Dates, times, what was said. Not because you'll need it immediately. Because you might need it eventually." My mother is a practical woman. I started writing things down. Now let me tell you about the necklace. My mother gave it to me the Christmas I was 15. The year before the divorce, before either of us knew what was coming. It was a simple gold chain with a small oval pendant, pale blue enamel, the size of my thumbnail. She had found it at an estate sale and thought of me immediately because blue was my color, she always said. The color that suits you without you having to do anything for it. It was not expensive. It was irreplaceable. I wore it on important days. First day of school, exams I cared about. The day I found out I made junior editor. I kept it in a small ceramic dish on my dresser when I wasn't wearing it. On a Saturday in February, the necklace was gone. Not misplaced. I checked everywhere that I would have put it. The dish was empty. I looked through my jewelry box, my dresser drawers, the bathroom counter. Nothing. I thought I had lost it. That was my first thought, and it sat in my stomach like something heavy. I retraced my steps from the last time I remembered wearing it, which had been the previous Tuesday. I did not find it. That evening, I mentioned it at dinner, casually. "Has anyone seen a small gold necklace, blue pendant? Just in case." My father said, "No." Renee said, "I'll keep an eye out." Brianna said nothing. She was eating and looking at her plate, and she said nothing, and I noticed the nothing the way you notice a specific silence in a room. I told myself I was being unfair. 3 days later, on a Tuesday evening, I came home from school to find Renee, my father, Renee's sister Carol, who was visiting, Carol's husband, and Brianna all in the living room. Brianna was holding the necklace. She was crying. I stood in the doorway and I took in the scene, and I understood what was happening before a single word was said. The way you understand certain things in your body before your brain has caught up. "My dad," she said. And her voice cracked on the word, the specific crack of someone in genuine pain or someone who had practiced this. "I need to tell you something. Something I've been afraid to say." My father looked at her with the full, open concern of a man who was watching someone he cared about suffer. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" and she said, "Jenna took this from my room. This necklace. I've had it for 2 years. It was a gift from my grandmother, and I found it in Jenna's dish, on her dresser this morning." The room went absolutely still. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. I want you to understand what it feels like to stand in a doorway and watch a lie being told about you, with tears and a trembling voice in front of people who have already, in the space of 20 seconds, decided you are guilty. It is not hot anger. Not at first. It is something colder than that. A kind of clarity, the way very cold water is clarifying. You see everything very precisely. The positions in the room, the expressions on each face. The specific way your father is looking at you, not with doubt, not with the question of, "Let me hear both sides," but with the flat, sad certainty of someone who has already decided. I said, "That's my necklace. My mother gave it to me." Brianna's tears increased. "That's what she does. I've had it since I was 15. My grandmother. It's mine," I said. "I've had it since I was 15. My mother gave it to me from an estate sale. It has blue enamel and Jenna," my father's voice. The particular tone that had always meant, "Stop talking. You're making this worse." "I'm not making anything worse. She took it from my room and now she's saying it's hers." "Why would she do that?" Renee said. And her voice was careful and controlled in the way of someone who was trying to be fair and was not quite managing it. "Why would Brianna take something from your room?" "Because she's been taking things from me since she got here," I said. "My study room, my dinner table, my magazine ideas. This is just the first time she took something I can hold in my hand." The room was very quiet. My father said, "Jenna, that is an extremely serious accusation. I know it is. Do you have any proof? Any proof at all that this necklace is yours?" I thought about the ceramic dish. The Tuesday I had worn it. The photograph from the first day of school where it was visible at my collar. I had not thought, in the moment of being ambushed in a doorway, to go get my phone. "I can show you a photo," I said. "From September. I'm wearing it in my first day of school picture." "Gold chains with blue pendants are not unique," Renee said gently. "That's not proof. My mother gave it to me." "Call her," my father said. "Right now. Call her and ask her to confirm." I called her. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She was at work. Evening shift at the clinic. She never had her phone on the floor. She's not answering. She's at work. Brianna, still crying, said, "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want my necklace back. I don't know why Jenna doesn't like me. I've tried so hard." And those words. That performance of bewildered hurt. I watched every person in that room receive them and believe them completely. My father looked at me. "Apologize," he said. That word, apologize. I looked at him for a long moment. The man who had said, "Give her some grace." The man who had said, "Renee says you make Brianna feel unwelcome." The man who had chosen a warm, loud new thing over the quiet, certain knowledge of his own daughter. I looked at Brianna, still crying, the necklace my mother had given me held in her hand. And I said, "I'm sorry." 2 words, hollow and cold and wrong. She nodded, still sniffling, with the particular grace of someone who has won and is being generous about it. I went to my room. I closed the door. I sat on my bed. I called my mother from the floor of my closet at 9 o'clock that night. She answered this time. I told her everything. My voice only broke once, at the word apologize. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Did you write it down?" I said, "Not yet. Write it down tonight," she said, "all of it. Exactly what was said and who was in the room. And Jen, we need to find the receipt." "What receipt?" she said. "I bought that necklace at Henderson's estate sales on Broad Street. I paid with my debit card. There is a transaction record. Find the date and I'll pull the statement." I sat up. "That's proof," I said. "That's proof," she said. "I want to stop here. Because this is the part where the story changes direction. And I think if you've ever been in a position where you had the truth and no one would hear it, you understand what it meant to suddenly have something you could hold. Type "I found the receipt" in the comments if you know what I mean. If you know the feeling of going from helpless to ready. And stay with me. Because what happened next took 3 weeks to set up and about 45 minutes to unfold. My mother found the debit card transaction within 2 days. Henderson's estate sales. The date, the amount. She texted me a screenshot of the bank statement with the line highlighted. I went to Henderson's estate sales after school on a Thursday. It was a small shop on Broad Street, the kind with glass cases and handwritten tags, and an owner who remembered things. The owner, a woman named Pat, who had run the shop for 20 years, had records. Not digital, paper ledgers, organized by month and category. She remembered estate jewelry specifically because she handled it herself. I told her the date. I told her what I was looking for. She found it in 11 minutes. A handwritten receipt. 1 gold chain with blue enamel pendant. The buyer's name, Linda Calloway. My mother's name. My mother's handwriting on the receipt where Pat had asked her to sign. I asked Pat if she would be willing to write a brief statement confirming the sale and the buyer's name. She looked at me for a moment. I was 17, standing in her shop in my school backpack, asking for a formal statement about a piece of jewelry. She said, "Is someone saying it isn't yours?" "Yes," I said. She got out a piece of paper. The second thing I needed was the photograph. I had been wearing the necklace in my first day of school photo from September, which my mother had taken and which was on her phone. I asked her to send it to me. She sent it with the timestamp still embedded in the file data, the kind of metadata that shows exactly when a photo was taken. September 4th. 4 months before Brianna had claimed to have had the necklace for 2 years. The third thing I needed was a witness. Not from that evening. Earlier. I thought back through 8 months of small moments, and I landed on Kayla. Kayla had been at my house in October. We had been studying in my room, and I had been wearing the necklace, and Kayla had asked about it, and I had told her my mother gave it to me, and she had held it in her hand for a moment and said the blue is so pretty. I texted Kayla, "Hey, do you remember in October when we were studying, and you asked about my necklace?" She responded in 3 minutes. "Yeah, the little blue one. Your mom gave it to you, right? Can you write that down, like in a text I can screenshot?" A pause. Then, "Jenna, what's happening?" I told her. "Everything." She sent the text. Formal as a 17-year-old text can be. Kayla Morris, October 14th. I saw Jenna wearing a gold chain with a blue enamel pendant. She told me her mother gave it to her. 3 pieces of evidence. A receipt in my mother's name. A time-stamped photograph. A witness statement. Now I needed the room. My mother called my father on a Sunday. I was not on the call. She told me about it after. She said, "I called him as a courtesy." I told him I had documentation that the necklace was mine and that I had purchased it for Jenna and that I would like to resolve this privately before taking any other steps. My father, apparently, said that it sounded like a misunderstanding and he would look into it. My mother said, "I'd like to do it in person, this week if possible, with everyone present." He agreed. She asked if Renee and Brianna could be there. He said he'd ask. They agreed. Of course they agreed, because Brianna was certain she had won, and certainty makes people sloppy. She had no reason to think I had anything. I had stood in that living room with no proof and apologized. As far as she knew, it was over. Thursday evening, 7 o'clock, the same living room. My mother arrived first. She was wearing a dark coat, and she had her bag with the folder in it, and she kissed me on the cheek when she came in and said quietly, "You ready?" I said yes. My father was sitting in his usual chair. Renee on the couch, Brianna beside her, looking relaxed, the posture of someone who did not believe they were about to have a problem. My mother sat down. She was composed in the way she always was, which was to say completely. She did not lead with anger. She did not lead with accusation. She thanked everyone for being there and said she wanted to clear something up. She opened the folder. She placed the bank statement on the coffee table. Date, amount, merchant name, Henderson's estate sales. Buyer, Linda Calloway. "This is my bank statement," she said, "from the date I purchased the necklace. 2 years and 4 months ago. I bought it at Henderson's estate sales on Broad Street for Jenna's birthday. Renee looked at the statement. Brianna had gone very still. She placed Pat's written statement beside it, a confirmation from the shop owner that she had sold a gold chain with blue enamel pendant to Linda Calloway on the stated date, with the original receipt on file. She placed the photograph. First day of school, September 4th of this school year. Jenna wearing the necklace. Timestamp visible. And she placed Kayla's text, printed, with the date. 4 items on the coffee table. The room was quiet. My father was reading. He was actually reading, going through each document, and I watched his face as he did, watched the shift in it. The particular expression of a person who is being shown, in organized documentary form, that they were wrong. Brianna, my mother said, turning to look at her directly. I'd like to ask you a question, and I'd like an honest answer. Where did you get this necklace? The silence was very long. Brianna's eyes went to her mother. A flicker. The kind of look that passes between two people who share information. Renee said, Brianna. And in Renee's voice was something I had not heard before. Not softness. Not defense. Something more like the first crack in a structure that has been holding something up. I found it, Brianna said finally. Her voice was different now. Smaller. I found it on her dresser, and I thought. You thought, my mother said. Take your time. I thought it would be funny, Brianna said. And then it got too big. The room absorbed that. I thought it would be funny. 8 months of careful, strategic erosion. My study room, my dinner conversations, my magazine, my necklace. And the moment it was named out loud, it reduced to, I thought it would be funny. My father put the documents down. He looked at Brianna for a long moment. Then he looked at me. And I watched my father understand, in real time, the distance between what he had assumed and what was true. The particular comprehension of a person who has been wrong in a specific and consequential way and knows it and cannot explain it away, he said. Jenna, I owe you an apology. I looked at him. Not a small one, he said. I know, I said. Renee had her hand over her mouth. She was not crying, but she looked like someone who had just recalculated something significant. She said, Brianna, you're going to apologize, right now. And Brianna, who had cried so convincingly in this same room 8 months ago, who had turned the heat of every adult in the house toward me with perfect precision, sat on the couch with her eyes down, and said, I'm sorry, Jenna. I looked at her for a long moment. I said, I know. Not, I forgive you. Not, it's okay. Just, I know. Because I did know. I had known since September. My mother and I drove home together that night. She dropped me back at the house afterward, and in the car, in the 10 minutes between Renee's street and my father's, I let the thing that had been held tight in my chest for 8 months loosen a little. She didn't say, I told you so. She didn't perform satisfaction. She just drove and let me be quiet. At a red light, she said, You handled that well. I said, You did most of it. She said, I found the receipt. You did the rest. That was true. Kayla, Pat, the photograph. I had assembled it myself. She said, That's the thing about documentation. It works when you're disciplined enough to keep it. I thought about the notes I had been keeping since she told me to. The dated entries. The specific words. The 8 months of small recorded moments. I said, I have a lot of it. She looked at me at the light. Good, she said. Keep it. The aftermath was not a single dramatic moment. I want to be honest with you about that. Life rarely gives you the clean ending where everything resolves at once. Brianna and I never became close. I did not expect that. I did not want that. What I wanted was for the terms to change, and they did. The Inalechi comments stopped. The insertions into my spaces stopped. The school situation recalibrated. She stopped presenting things at literary magazine meetings that sounded like modified versions of my ideas. Whether that was because she had been confronted, or because she had lost the confidence that comes from operating without consequence, I don't know. Either way, it stopped. Kayla stopped saying Brianna is actually really cool, not because I asked her to, because she had watched what happened and she was a person with good instincts, and she adjusted accordingly. Mr. Aldridge noticed the shift. He didn't comment on it directly, but one afternoon in April, he asked me to stay after a meeting, and he said, "I feel like your voice has gotten stronger this semester. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I said, "I've been keeping notes." He said, "On what?" I said, "Everything." He looked at me for a moment and said, "That's actually excellent advice for a writer. For anyone, really." My father and I had a longer conversation. Not that Thursday evening, which was too raw for anything real. A few weeks later, in the kitchen, over the ordinary kitchen table conversation that had always been the best version of how we talk, he said, "I should have listened better." I said, "Yes." He said, "I think I didn't want to see it because seeing it meant having to deal with it, and dealing with it was complicated." I said, "It was complicated for me too, and I didn't have the option of looking away." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "That's fair. That's exactly fair." We didn't fix everything in that conversation, but we started. And starting, after 8 months of him looking in the wrong direction, was enough for now. Renee was the one who surprised me most. She came to my room one evening, knocked, asked if she could come in. She sat on the edge of the desk chair and she said, "I want to tell you that I'm sorry. Not just for Thursday. For the whole time. I think I made assumptions about the dynamic between you two that weren't fair to you, and I should have paid more attention." She said it simply, without justification. Without the defensive qualifications that people add when they're apologizing for form rather than substance. I said, "Thank you. I mean that." She nodded. She said, "I'm going to pay more attention." I believed her. I am 22 now. I'm in my last year of university, studying communications and creative writing. I am the editor of the university's literary journal, not a junior editor. The editor. I took the position in my second year, and I have held it since. Mr. Aldridge wrote one of my recommendation letters for university. He said, in the letter, which he showed me before sending, that I had a rare ability to observe precisely and to translate that observation into language that made other people see what I had seen. I thought about the notes I had kept for 8 months, the dated entries, the specific words, the practice of writing down what I saw so I wouldn't lose it. Maybe that was where it started. My mother and I talk every Sunday. Her voice on the phone sounds like the early morning, like the thing you reach for before the day has put its weight on you. She is at the same clinic. 2 years ago, they made her team lead. She called me to tell me, and I cried before she finished the sentence. I visit my father on alternating holidays. Renee makes good food and has kept her word about paying attention. Brianna is in a different city now, a job in marketing that suits her considerable talent for reading rooms. We are civil in the way of 2 people who lived through something and came out with a shared knowledge they will never discuss. I do not hold the 8 months against her the way I once held it. Not because I've forgotten. I have not forgotten. I have it written down. But because I am 22, and I have learned something in the time since that living room, and the folder on the coffee table, and the look on my father's face as he read 4 pieces of documentation that reorganized his understanding of what had been happening in his own house, I have learned that the people who try to make you smaller are often afraid of the size you would become if they didn't. And the best answer to that fear is not to shrink, it is to grow. Quietly and consistently, and with excellent documentation. To become so specifically, verifiably, undeniably yourself that there is no version of the story in which you can be written out of it. Brianna tried to rewrite me. For 8 months she worked at it. And what stopped her was not a dramatic confrontation or a scene in a school hallway. It was a bank statement and a shop owner, and a time-stamped photograph, and a friend who remembered the blue pendant. Specifics. That's what it came down to. Know your specifics. Document your specifics. Carry your receipts, literally and otherwise. The truth is almost always documentable. You just have to be patient enough to find the documentation. From a psychological perspective, what Brianna did over those 8 months has a name. It is called relational manipulation, specifically the pattern of behavior where one person systematically undermines another's credibility and standing within a shared social environment. It relies on three things: plausible deniability, the sympathy of shared adults, and the target's isolation. When those three things are working in concert, the manipulation can continue almost indefinitely. What ended it was equally systematic. Documentation removed plausible deniability. A neutral third party, Pat at the estate sale, removed the sympathy dynamic. And my mother's organized, unhurried presentation of evidence removed the isolation by making the truth legible to the adults in the room. Emotional appeals don't defeat calculated manipulation. Documentation does. If you are in a situation like this one, I want you to say something clearly. Write it down. Date it. Keep the receipts. Not because you plan to go to war. Because the truth deserves to be held carefully. Because you deserve to be able to show it clearly when the moment comes. And the moment almost always comes. That's my story. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do by someone you had to live with? Have you ever been in a room where everyone believed the wrong person? Tell me in the comments. Type, "I kept the receipts," or "I documented everything." I want to know how many of you are out there. If this story reached you, please subscribe. I share stories like this every week. And if you know someone who needs to hear this one today, send it to them right now. Thank you for being here until the very end.